a second Trump term is not going to feature those people, as you just acknowledged. There won't be any Mattises or Boltons or Pompeos even. There will only be MAGA loyalists who will be keen to do exactly what Trump wants. And he could not have been clearer. Even in the one presidential debate, he could not bring himself to say that he wants Ukraine to win. Welcome to Beg to Differ, the Bulwark's weekly roundtable discussion featuring civil conversation across the political spectrum. We range from center-left to center-right. I'm Mona Charen, syndicated columnist and policy editor at the Bulwark, and I am joined by our regulars, Bill Galston of the Brookings Institution and the Wall Street Journal, Damon Linker, who writes the Substack newsletter Notes from the Middle Ground, and Linda Chavez of the Niskanen Center. Our special guest this week is New York Times columnist Bret Stephens. Welcome, one and all. Bret, I've been very eager to speak with you about your very stimulating columns over the last several weeks, and I want to get in our second segment to the burning question of what a Trump victory would mean for America's role in the world, but we're going to hold off on that for now and address the immediate issue, where as we are recording this, it's Thursday, October 10th, we are awaiting an Israeli counterattack against Iran, which has been telegraphed. We don't know the nature of it. Yoav Gallant has said it will be surprising. So I want to get a sense from you, Bret, about you wrote a recent column saying that we should be rooting for Israel to win this encounter with Israel's enemies, and you make the case that these are our enemies as well. So I'd like you to expand on that, if you would, for a few minutes.
Well, Iran has been the Islamic, I should say not Iran, but the Islamic regime that rules and misrules Iran has been at war with the United States since 1979. Ask the American diplomats who were hostage there, the families of the Marines and diplomats who were killed in Beirut in 1983. Ask the GIs who were grievously injured by Iranian-made munitions, or people like the Washington Post Jason Rezaian and so many other American citizens who were held hostage by the regime. Iran has two Satans. The little Satan is Israel. The big Satan is us in the United States. So the idea that somehow this is merely Israel's war against Iran rather than one that involves us is I think, misleading. I would add one other point, which is that Iranian proxies like the Houthis are challenging, as we speak, American troops, sailors in the Red Sea and elsewhere in the Middle East. We are in fact in a low-grade war with them. We just are choosing not to notice. But there is a moment here, I think a historical one, where Israel has the opportunity and I think the international legitimacy to retaliate to last week's 180 ballistic missile fusillade against Israel, missiles that were aimed at Tel Aviv, aimed at civilian centers in throughout Israel, and to put that regime on notice that it is vulnerable and much weaker than perhaps it thinks it is.
All right, so let me ask a crude question, and forgive the pun, about possible retaliation, because one of the potential targets is Karg Island and Iran's oil infrastructure, and arguably in the weeks before a national election, an attack on Iran's oil infrastructure could affect the global price of oil. Perhaps not the best thing for the Biden-Harris administration to countenance. How do you react to that?
Well, I would be surprised if they attack Karg Island. The key word that Defense Minister Gallant used was surprising. And I think every Tom, Dick, and Harry is assuming an Israeli attack on Iran's energy infrastructure, which is the easiest thing to strike, large targets that the Iranians wouldn't be able to move in time. So my guess is, and I might be proved wrong real soon, but my guess is that when they say surprising, it'll be something in the spirit of the pager attack and walkie-talkie attack that we saw a few weeks ago in Lebanon, something that contains elements of psychological shock that might undermine the confidence of the regime and might, in fact, give some heart to the Iranian people who've been suffering under this regime all these years. And how it affects the American election, who's to say?
Yeah. So regarding those recent attacks where Israel has been so successful, obviously has great intelligence about Hezbollah and has been able to really decimate their leadership, killed Nasrallah, the pager attacks, etc. And this has elevated Netanyahu again, as seeming, that he has 9 lives, and he's seeming to be a strong leader again. But you've written very, very effectively about his failures in the past, that he has never taken responsibility for the initial intelligence failure that led to October 7th. You wrote a very powerful column about all the ways in which a better Israeli prime minister would be handling this war. And you strongly imply that that Netanyahu is responsible for prolonging the war for his own political ends.
Well,
and not for...
Look, I want to be careful because I think in a much better world, Israel would be under different leadership. But as I remember, someone once said, you go to war with the army you have, you go to war with the prime minister you've got. And he's the democratically elected prime minister of Israel. The last 3 weeks have fundamentally transformed Israel's, I think, security posture. Israel spent the better part of a year, I think, fighting badly in Gaza. I understand there were all kinds of tactical successes and a tremendous amount of courage by Israeli soldiers on the battlefield, but with no clear concept of an end game of what it is that they wanted to do. I think all due credit must be given to the entire security establishment there, which ultimately includes Netanyahu, for a brilliant campaign so far in Lebanon. Actually, the campaign they had spent 15 years planning for, more than 15 years, I guess since 2006, 18 years planning for, and they've executed it with astounding agility. There have been a handful of soldiers Israeli soldiers who have died in southern Lebanon, but it was not the bloodbath that many anticipated given the experience of 2006. And Israeli intelligence in Lebanon, in Syria, and elsewhere appears to be just peerless. It's just an extremely, it's sort of what we expected of Israel before October 7th of last year, and how they failed so badly. But now they have recovered their mojo, much in the way that they recovered it in 1973 after the reversals in the first few days of that war.
So, Bill Galston, your reaction to all of this, and if you would just comment a little bit on the changed international posture. That is, we have seen over the last 12 months. I mean, Israel was always a scapegoat for the international community, but that, if anything, has gotten much worse.
Well, there's no doubt about that. And we will debate for a long time whether Israel could have handled the public diplomacy around this war better than it did. I think the answer to that question is yes. How much of a difference that would have made, I'm not sure. I would like to ask Bret a question, Mona, if that's okay. And that is, I fully agree with you that Israel has the opportunity to strike back against Iran. As a matter of fact, I think it also has the responsibility to do so, because to allow the kind of massive attack that occurred a few days ago to go unanswered would be a real blow to deterrence and credibility. Having said that, it's not obvious to me that Israel could inflict the kind of transformative damage on Iran that it has to Hezbollah, and to change that strategic equation fundamentally. So how does this play out in your view? I just ran into a very experienced Middle East hand who said unequivocally that if Israel retaliates, that won't be the end of it. And
as Niels Bohr famously said, prediction is very difficult, especially about the future. Which is kind of amusing when you think of it in light of the old joke about how under socialism, it's the past that can never be predicted. So the answer...
I'd forgotten that one.
I mean, the most candid answer to your excellent question, Bill, is I don't know. What I do know is that if you had asked an assembly of sober, middle-of-the-road Middle East experts a month ago whether Israel could fundamentally change the strategic picture vis-a-vis Hezbollah, they would have told you no, that there was a kind of a balance of terror, that Hezbollah had so many rockets and missiles compared to Hamas that effectively they would be able to inflict damage on Israel that Israel simply couldn't accept, that not only hundreds but thousands of Israeli lives, civilian lives, would be at risk in the event of Hezbollah's counterstrike. And that didn't happen. So we may not know. What we do know is that Israel has been able, at least at the level of tactical intelligence coups, to do a great deal of damage to Iran's capacity. It's one of the reasons why Iran's predicted nuclear breakout always seems to lie somewhere in the future, because that can has been effectively kicked by Israel down the road. Now, how does this play out? Again, it's hard to say. I think if Israel launches some kind of Osirak-like frontal strike, by Osirak I mean the Israeli strike on the Iraqi nuclear reactor in 1981, then you're going to have Iranian retaliation of the kind that we saw a couple weeks ago and again in April, and it's difficult to predict how that ends. But what I suspect the Israelis are going to do is have a kind of attack that has an aspect of ambiguity, that has an aspect of that doesn't immediately elicit the kind of reaction that you would expect from the Iranians. And by the way, the Iranians are sensitive to the fact that they came close to a regime-ending event in September of 2022 because a poor Kurdish girl was brutalized and killed on the streets of Tehran, and it led to weeks and months of the most serious protests the regime had experienced. They're sensitive to the fact that if Israel does not strike their oil infrastructure, that could be the next thing. And so they're a calculating regime whose principal interests ultimately lie in their own survival. So they will be very careful. They have noticed that 2 successive massive volleys of ballistic missiles and cruise missiles left Israel effectively unscathed. And so their toolkit, between their losses with Hezbollah, between the devastation of Hamas in Gaza, and the ineffectuality or the ineffectiveness of their ballistic missile strikes, their tools are not really obvious and available. So again, I don't know is the bottom line, but I am reluctant to accept the wisdom of experts in this area. Many people claim expertise, and my experience is that very few people truly have it.
Linda, one of the things that has been revealed over the last 3-4 weeks is that both Hezbollah and Iran have been revealed to be far weaker than anybody thought. And that has been a revelation, arguably, even as one could say that Hamas has proved to be stronger than anybody thought. Hamas was perceived as Israel's weakest enemy, and in some ways it has proved its most damaging in this past year. But does this revelation about Iran's weakness invite a reevaluation of the whole U.S. approach where, certainly under Obama, and to a degree under Biden, much less, but, there has been this view of, what we need to do is sort of appease Iran and perhaps get them more involved in the region and give them a stake and make them sort of, stakeholders in a peaceful, region and so forth, which really has not played out well.
That never worked. It doesn't work. It didn't work in World War II with Germany, and it's certainly not going to work with Iran. So, I think appeasement is absolutely off the table. I can't imagine anything that we could offer Iran that would make them suddenly able to be partners with other civilized countries, brought into the community of nations. But I do want to go back to this question of what it is that can be done. And I do think that anything that allows Iran to continue to pursue its nuclear program is simply pushing down the road some ultimate confrontation. And while I think Bret and others are right that this attack, failed, as did their earlier attack with drones, but the calculus changes on a dime as soon as they have a nuclear weapon. That makes them much more seriously dangerous. And the question in my mind, and maybe Bret has some thoughts about this, is short of bombing nuclear sites, which as I understand it, and I'm certainly no expert on this, would require the kind of mother of all bombs that we don't know whether Israel has them. I don't think the United States has provided them. But short of that kind of physical attack on the infrastructure, can we look at what was done with Hezbollah, both in taking out leadership, but also in interrupting the command structure? And, when you talk about surprising attacks, is that something that maybe is on the table and maybe they have the capability for?
We will find out, all of us, real soon. And my guess is that Israel has been able to penetrate. Just to give you one story, I read, and I believe it was accurate, that Iranians who went to their ATM machines not long ago to withdraw money got a message in Hebrew. Okay? So it allows you to imagine where Israel may be in its ability, for example, to shut down Iranian financial flows and collapse their economy very quickly, simply by depriving it of information on which even a relatively primitive economy like Iran's heavily depends. You saw, going back about a dozen years, this thing called Olympic Games, where the United States and Israel cooperated on the Stuxnet virus, which made Iran's uranium centrifuges spin too slowly or too quickly, and essentially destroyed some percentage of their enrichment capabilities. The Iranians were able to recover from that, but one has to assume that the Israelis have also thought about other ways in which they can penetrate through the concrete, because ultimately all of this infrastructure has to have some connection to outside sources of energy, information, software, and so on. There was a case not a few years ago where desks at an Iranian nuclear facility mysteriously blew up, right? Someone had put in some amount of explosives into the desk and had done damage that way. So this is not North Korea. This is a large country that has been and remains possible to penetrate. And I take that word surprising very much to heart. If people like us, never mind front page commentators, have predicted Karg Island, the nuclear facilities, and so on, my kids used to watch a cartoon where the motto was "expect the unexpected," and as much of a childish cliche as it sounds, it seems apt here.
Damon, so in addition, you could add to Bret's list, the murder of the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in a guest house in Tehran. So, obviously the Israelis have penetrated deep within that society and that regime. But regarding the nuclear thing, I hear a lot of Jewish Americans saying, that the whole problem with Biden is that he has discouraged Israel from taking out Iran's nuclear capacity, and that's why we need Trump. It just strikes me, first of all, that if Israel had the capacity to do that militarily, that they probably would have done it by now, whatever the U.S. said. Certainly it wasn't done when Trump was president. And third, the Iranians have shown themselves actually not to be a suicidal cult, right? They are more cautious than that. They're certainly willing to do a lot of evil in the world through their proxies, but when it comes to their own country, they are pretty cautious. And so I don't see, obviously, we really desperately do not want them to become a nuclear armed power. But honestly, if they were, they would still be deterrable. How do you react to that?
Well, they would be mutually deterrable in the way that mutually armed nuclear powers are.
In the same way that North Korea is.
Right. I mean, and I liked very much Bret's analysis of the current situation, because it sounds to me a lot more sober than the kinds of discussions that you sometimes have heard among pundits down through the last couple of decades about how Iran has this kind of suicidally apocalyptic cult in power, and it would not hesitate the moment it gets a nuke to fire it at Tel Aviv and just wipe Israel off the map and then clap and do a dance. Instead, I think it is much more accurate to say that the people in charge of Iran do not want to die in a mushroom cloud, a half hour after that event, which is exactly what would happen. And they know that. But it is true that you have a tremendous deterrent effect when you possess that weapon. That's why they want it. That's why everyone wants it. But the reality, of course, in the world is that human beings know how to make these weapons now. And so any country that reaches a sufficient level of technological and scientific proficiency are going to, in theory, be able to build these things, because it's possible to get the knowledge to do it and to build the technology required. And so there is no reality in which Iran never can have a nuke. What there is a reality in which we must keep kicking the can down the road. In effect, that's the best we can hope for, is do anything we can to make it so that that bomb is not a month away and preferably not a year away, but maybe a decade away. And then when it gets to be a year away again, it's another decade away because we do some other thing that pushes it further off into the distance. And the thing that I find very encouraging about Bret's analysis, which sounds pretty sound to me, is that what we should expect is the unexpected and something broadly within the purview of what we saw happen in Lebanon, which is a surprise, intelligence-driven, tactical wallop to their nuclear program in a way that will set it back quite a ways, not destroy it, not blow up all the labs where the uranium is stored and being enriched and where they're working on other aspects of the process, but make it so that, oh, well, they were hoping they could rush this out and maybe in the next 6 months they'll actually have at least a weapon, and then they have to work on the missile technology to deliver it. But no, now it's years away, or even more than just a few, but maybe a decade away. And that, I think, I have to say, I'm not a young guy, and I've been watching this stuff for a long time. I have never seen anything like that pager operation. They got into the guts of thousands of these devices and used them for the purposes of eavesdropping on thousands of conversations for years and waited for the right moment to turn them into exploding devices. That's the most impressive thing I've seen since the response to the Munich assault at the Olympics, where you just sit back and say, wow, they know what they're doing. The Mossad is not to be messed with. And it made me pretty encouraged at what is possible with intelligence in our time.
Look, they stole all of Iran's nuclear archive.
Yep.
That a physical heist taken from a suburb of Tehran. They assassinated Iran's top nuclear scientist using a remote-controlled gun because they knew not only where he would be on what road, they knew that he would be in which seat of the car so that they didn't hit his wife. It's actually, it's kind of astonishing. You sometimes ask yourself, do you think the CIA could do this? Nah, I don't think so.
I just heard a former CIA person on a podcast saying he did not think the CIA could have done this.
Well, a couple of weeks ago, right after the pager thing, I joked on Twitter that I'm starting to think every third operative in Hezbollah is actually an Israeli agent.
Well, this was the other thing. There was an item that Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the former president, claimed, and I actually have no reason to disbelieve him, that the head of the Iranian intelligence unit responsible for ferreting out Mossad operatives was a Mossad operative. Which, who knows, but it was Ahmadinejad of all people making this case, not someone on our side of things.
Well,
Wow.
this is so to just close this topic and respond to something that Damon said about kicking the can down the road. It reminds me of the old joke, which you probably all know, about the king or potentate who volunteers to free a convict from a death penalty if he can make his horse talk in a year. And the convict accepts this challenge, and his friend turns to him and says, "What are you thinking? Horses can't talk." And he says, "A year is a long time. In a year, the king could die, I could die, or the horse could talk." So that's the argument for kicking the can down the road. All right, we're going to turn to what the world would look like if Trump were to win. But first, we will have a word from our sponsor, Miracle Made. So the nights are getting chilly now, and you want to curl up with comfortable sheets that are temperature regulated. And that's why we recommend Miracle Made. These sheets are inspired by NASA, and they use silver-infused fabrics that keep you comfortable and the correct temperature all night long. This silver fabric that's part of the sheets helps to keep them clean, and they stay fresher and cleaner 3 times longer than other sheets. They are designed for your skin so that your skin doesn't get clogged with dust and bacteria. And they are as comfortable as sheets that you would find with a much higher price tag and at luxury hotels. So go to trymiracle.com/beg-to-differ to try Miracle Made sheets today. And whether you're buying them for yourself or as a gift for a loved one, if you order today, you can save 40%. Use your promo code BEG-to-differ at checkout, and you'll also get 3 free towels and save an extra 20%. Miracle Made is so confident in their product that they back it with a 30-day money-back guarantee. If you are not 100% satisfied, you will get a full refund. Upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made. Go to trymiracle.com/beg-to-differ and use the code BEG-to-differ to claim your 3-piece towel set for free and save another 40%. Again, that's trymiracle.com/beg-to-differ to treat yourself. And we thank them for sponsoring this podcast. All right. Readers of the New York Times will know that Bret Stephens has a column that he does together with Gail Collins, where they discuss the state of the world. And the recurring theme week after week is Gail begging Bret to endorse Kamala Harris. Bret has so far resisted.
Oh, God.
So
I feared this would come up.
So here we are at the Bulwark, Bret, But let us look at what a world with a reelected Trump would look like, just in terms of the U.S. world, the America's world leadership role. So let's start with something that's been in the news, namely the Trump-Putin relationship. Arguably a key feature of America's world role has been resistance to, even allergy to, strongmen, dictators, tyrants of various kinds. Trump has some sort of Jones for the tough guys. He admires Viktor Orban. He boasts of his relationship with Kim Jong-un. And we now learn he sent testing kits, COVID testing kits, or at least according to Woodward, hasn't been confirmed by others, but no reason to think it's not the case. The Kremlin confirms it. Sent testing kits to Putin at the beginning of COVID, and that they have been in touch, Putin and Trump, since Trump left office, maybe 6 or 7 times, and that Trump shoos aides out of the office when Trump is speaking to Putin. So, and when you add that together with with Trump's stated hostility to Ukraine, and the importance of the struggle for Ukraine in terms of the balance of power and the kind of world order that we're going to have. I'll start with you, Bret. Isn't that an extremely worrying prospect?
Yeah, but maybe it's because I'm talking to you, Mona, Damon, and Bill, and Linda. I'm going to push back a little bit.
Go for it.
For the sake of provocation. If you actually look at Trump's policy with Ukraine, the administration, let me distinguish that. The Trump administration's policy towards Ukraine, it was far better than it was under Obama. And it was far better than it was, at least at the beginning of the Biden administration. In terms of actual policy with Russia, as opposed to that weird, unaccountable bromance between Trump and Putin, Trump pushed very hard to end the Nord Stream pipeline, risking relations with Germany. The Biden administration was prepared to greenlight it. In fact, did greenlight it on the eve of the invasion of Ukraine. So you had policy that was just substantially better and very different from the mood music that Trump was apparently setting. Now, the question then is, was this policy conducted essentially by people like John Bolton and General McMaster and others in the administration who are more reminiscent of the Republican Party that some of us used to feel some warmth to, and Trump simply didn't even notice? Or was Trump conducting this weird two-track policy of being tough in practice and extremely accommodating in terms of the personal relationship? Now, my fear, of course, is that if Trump were to execute the kinds of policies that he claims to want, I find that terrifying. I find the idea of abandoning Ukraine terrifying. Of all the arguments that I can think of against Trump, I think that may be the most decisive argument to vote for Harris. But I just want to say that people in the service of intellectual honesty have to look back at the Trump administration and say, actually, Trump did more to prepare the Ukrainians for the invasion than either Obama or Biden ever did.
Okay, let's just stipulate that Trump was easily distracted. Often his governance was characterized by inattention. And so people in his administration were able to do things that he wasn't paying attention to. And often those were good things, the kinds of things that we liked. But a second Trump term is not going to feature those people, as you just acknowledged. There won't be any Mattises or Boltons or Pompeos even. There will only be MAGA loyalists who will be keen to do exactly what Trump wants. And he could not have been clearer. Even in the one presidential debate, he could not bring himself to say that he wants Ukraine to win.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody else want to weigh in on Ukraine before we get to other international?
But can I just make one point here, Mona, just very quickly? Yeah. Those of us who hate Trump, okay, and I think that is pretty much everyone on this call, right? We got to decide whether the problem is fundamentally that he is a sinister Mussolini wannabe, or he's a colossal horse's ass, right? And
why either or?
No, it's either or, because Vladimir Putin, say what you will, okay, is not a horse's ass, right? He is a willful, obviously highly intelligent schemer, right? Who is in good control of his government. The problem with I don't know if it was the problem, oddly, the virtue of Trump's first administration, if it had a virtue, is what you just described, that he wasn't really in charge of the policy, right? He didn't really know exactly what was going on, whether he had torn up the South Korean free trade agreement, whether he was what the actual American policy was in whether it was in eastern Syria or in Ukraine or so many other places. And I think those of us who are never Trumpers probably need to decide for ourselves which of these Trumps more closely conforms to the reality we experience. Because I suspect that Trump 2.0 will be pretty much in the form of Trump 1.0. Maybe you disagree.
Let me just, before answering that, let me just cite one other aspect of this, because so it's not just, is he a buffoon or is he, Mussolini? Because there is a quality to the way his mind works that is alarming for people who say, for anyone contemplating allowing him to be back in the Oval Office. In that famous phone call with Zelensky, he played into these crazy MAGA conspiracy ideas that he picks up from the fever swamps that he swims in. And he said to Zelensky, in exchange for giving him arms, he was saying, I want you to do me a favor. I would like you to find out what happened with this whole situation with Ukraine. They say CrowdStrike. I guess you have one of your wealthy people. The server, they say Ukraine has it. Now, this is a lunatic idea that it was actually the DNC that had interfered in the election. By the way, the Ukrainians had very good reasons to prefer Hillary over Trump. That I'm not disputing. But he went down this rabbit hole of believing that the server with the emails was actually in Ukraine. He's a little addled. Isn't that alone enough to say this person is unfit? Full stop.
Yeah, I do think he's unfit.
Okay.
Could I
Go ahead, Linda.
I mean, we are talking as if Donald Trump of 2024 is the same as Donald Trump of 2020, 2016. He is not. We had an enormous earthquake campaign because it was determined that Joe Biden was suffering some cognitive decline. It is demonstrable to anybody who listens to Donald Trump speak for more than 15 minutes to know that something very serious is going on with him. So I think that has to be taken into account. I also think that talking about the administration and who served in roles the last time around, those people will not serve with him again. It is going to be a new and very dangerous group.
So Bill Galston, jump in.
Just one line. Trump's quote-unquote peace plan to end the war in Ukraine is a surrender plan. It's not a peace plan. Or it may be a peace plan along the classic Roman lines where one of the historians wrote, they make a desert and call it peace. And it seems to me that at some point, we have to take this guy at his word, that that's what he's going to do if he gets the power to do it. And is anyone prepared to take the chance that he doesn't mean it? I'm not.
Damon Linker. NATO, arguably the world's most successful military alliance ever, maybe, has been strengthened under Biden. Trump, according to John Bolton, wanted to exit NATO in the first term, and Bolton believes he would do so in a second term. Maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. What is not in dispute is that his very lack of confidence in it, his concept of NATO as a shakedown operation where the U.S. is constantly being fleeced by its allies, undermines it psychologically right there. And hearkening back to something we were talking about earlier about people wanting to get nuclear weapons. You said countries want to get nuclear weapons as soon as they get the wherewithal. But that's not quite right. There are a lot of countries that have the wherewithal, but they refrain because they are under the U.S.'s nuclear umbrella and they have trusted the United States to come to their aid over the last 75 years. And that is something that would be very much in doubt in a second Trump term.
Right. And I'd like to link that. I agree with that. And I'd like to link it up, what you said about NATO and what we've been saying about Ukraine to Bret's point earlier about this question of, Trump's state of mind. Is he addled and confused and just a worshiper of dictators? Or was he maybe, when he was president, running a kind of two-track policy where he makes nice to Putin on the phone and at international summits while there's no one allowed in the room with the two of them. But then when he comes home, he empowers his staff to be tougher on Ukraine and Russian policy in its near abroad than either the Obama or the Biden administration pre-February 2022. I really do think that Trump and what he wants is extremely clear. Now, I tend to think he's an idiot, but he's an idiot who knows what he believes about certain very few number of things. And that list is basically immigration, trade and tariffs, and foreign policy. And he is, I don't use the term very often isolationist. I think it's more illustrative to describe it as muscular unilateralism in which America's interests are defined exceedingly narrowly. So it's not that Trump doesn't want war or to use American military power. He simply does not want to be constrained in any way. He does not want us to be obligated to defend anybody, and that means no treaty obligations. So that's why he doesn't like NATO. He doesn't like the idea that he might be forced to do something. He wants to be able to be a great power in a kind of late 19th century sense, playing ball with China and Russia and kind of deciding how to carve up the world. And that is not compatible with American foreign policy since the end of World War II. And going back to Trump personally and how his mind works, I do think it is accurate to say that during his first administration, he was outmaneuvered by his staff. They did what they thought needed to be done in terms of the more or older order Reagan/Bush Republican Party. And he didn't really know what was going on. And they outsmarted him. That is not going to happen again. We know that for just one example, that his vice president used to be Mike Pence, and it's going to be J.D. Vance if he wins. And J.D. Vance is not, you might say you don't know what he thinks because he changes his mind every few days, and there is some truth to that. But it's also true that he has, since he started running for the Senate, he has cultivated an ideology of muscular unilateralism with our interests narrowly defined. And so he's put kind of ideas on the bones of Trump's instincts on foreign policy. And there is a wide circle of advisors who are going to get the top jobs in a Trump White House and in the Pentagon. I know some of them, and they are very much committed to getting out of Ukraine immediately. They think this was a mistake. They think that it's very risky. It risks a nuclear confrontation with Putin. I think that's ridiculous, but they believe it. And some of them think we need to do it so we can put all our chips on Taiwan and China. Others don't even care about that. But either way, they want nothing to do with NATO and Ukraine. They think that's 20th century stuff and we need to move on. And so I do think that's really the choice that we confront. And I've talked too long, so I'll stop.
Brett, do you want to respond to anything that's been said so far?
No, I agree. Trump, this is terrifying stuff. And, my misgivings is that I don't see a Biden administration that has any kind of plan for victory in Ukraine either, that other than to prevent defeat. And I would love to hear from Kamala Harris, as we used to hear from candidates in the past, Hillary Clinton, John McCain, Bill Clinton, you name it, an idea of what it is that a Harris administration would do in Ukraine other than not to just lose slowly, which is what we're doing now.
I too would love to hear her use the word victory. That would be bracing. But when there's a choice between surrender and not losing, that's not a hard one as far as I'm concerned. But Bill?
I don't mean to shock anybody, but there is no victory plan, and there can't be. If you define victory the way President Zelensky is defining victory. I mean, unless we got directly involved fighting on Ukraine's side, which I don't believe anybody would do, That said, the Democratic Party deal would include, a standstill ceasefire plus an accelerated route for Ukraine into NATO. Right? That is as close to victory as we can get. Securing what's left of Ukraine, which is most of it, as part of the West, economically, culturally, and militarily. And if Bret has a plan for victory in Ukraine, as the Ukrainians define it, this would be a great time to share it with us.
I agree with Bill, by the way. I'd like to add my name to that.
At the end of this discussion, this is actually something Bill and I should talk about offline.
Okay. That can be arranged. We're a full service podcast. With that, we will close out the substantive part of our discussion and go to our highlight, lowlight segment of this week, but we're doing it a little differently. I have asked everybody to recommend something that they have enjoyed on television and can recommend, because in these stressful days leading up to the election, we all need a little escape. So I'm going to start with you, Linda. What have you been enjoying?
Well, I just finished Slow Horse, which is one of my favorite. But what I want to recommend is a different series on Apple. It's called Pachinko. It's in its second season. I also read the 2017 novel by Min Lee. It is about Koreans living in Japan. It goes back and forth from pre-World War II through World War II to the present. I think it's delightful. It's beautiful. The characters are great, and I highly recommend it.
Oh, excellent. Okay. Bill Galston.
This is an easy one. I loved Babylon Berlin in its first iteration. I am thrilled that it's back, right? It is filled with scenes that I will never forget. It's just a hell of a show.
Excellent. Bret Stephens.
I can't tell a lie. I haven't watched television in over a year.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But I have had, as of today, 100 bylines in the New York Times in 2024, and we still have close to 3 months to go.
Fair enough. If you want to throw a book recommendation out, that we can do that too. I'll come back to you.
One of these days I'll read a novel again.
Damon Linker.
Well, it's always a little awkward when we have these, because I do watch television, but I am always very far behind anything trendy. So like I watched Mad Men after it was over. I watched Breaking Bad after it was over. And the latest of these is I watched Game of Thrones long after it had come to an end. And I have to say it was much better than I expected it to be. It is also like incredibly, sleazy in sexual terms and moral terms, and it's unbelievably violent. But the reason why I actually will recommend it has to do with the violence. That I actually found it to be extremely productive for my own thinking outside of the box of our contemporary liberal modern lives, to be exposed to a world that is absolutely permeated by cruelty, torture, suffering, in a way that is almost unthinkable to modern thinking, at least in the West, in the liberal world. And so it was very useful. I mean, it's obviously a fantasy show, and there are no dragons in the real world like there are on that show. But, a lot of the torture and events are based on, medieval Europe. I mean, flaying was a thing, tearing the flesh off of a human being while they're alive to torture them. That happens in the show, and it's excruciating to see, but to be reminded of what the world looks like outside of modern liberal democratic reality is, I think, very, very clarifying. And I appreciated it for that, as well as the sheer entertainment value of it.
Okay. Thank you. And now for something completely different. I am going to recommend a French series called Call My Agent. Again, it's not super new. It's been out for a few years, but it is, in the finest tradition of French farce, just funny, charming, delightful, surprising. It's not one of those shows where you always can anticipate the plot twists. It's just pure pleasure. So enjoy. All right. With that,
it'll give you a chance to watch every French actor.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, all of it's supposed to be about an agency that represents all these actors, and it's every single major French actor of the last 40 years makes a cameo. So it's very enjoyable. All right. With that, I want to thank our guest, Bret Stephens. Thank you so much for coming. And let us be the first ones to know when you decide whether you're going to endorse Kamala Harris. And I want to thank our regular panel and our producer, Jim Swift. Also, our viewers and listeners. Beg to Differ will return next week, as every week.